So there's just this. Just this. What I mean by this is whatever's arising, whatever's happening. Sounds, thoughts, maybe feelings, perceptions, movement, physical sensations, whatever is arising, whatever phenomena are arising. There's just this. There's only this. In a way, what I'm saying may be staggeringly obvious in one way, that whatever is happening, whatever happens, can only happen in this, because this is all there is. There isn't anything other than this. So if there's a memory, it can only happen in this. If there's a hope, it can only happen in this. And already with those words, memory and hope, I brought in the idea of time. We might think, well then, there's a past because there's memory, and there's a future because there's hope, and yet maybe it's possible to notice that past and future can also only arise in this, because there isn't anything else for past or future to arise in. So in one sense, it's incredibly simple. There is simply whatever phenomena are happening. But one of the things that tends to arise in this, very often I've noticed, is the sense of being a person. And when the sense of being a person arises, then there is a sense of separation from this. So we could say there's just this, but in this there's the sense of separation from this. So there's a sense now that there's two things. There's everything that's happening, and then there's a person who's separate from that everything is happening to. So in a sense that's duality. That's the arising of duality, because we've now got two things. We've got this, and we've got the sense that this is happening to someone who's separate from this. But notice that sense of separation is also only arising in this. It's just part of this. And that sense of separation, that sense that there... You see, what I'm trying to get at is that there may be, I don't want to make assumptions, but there may be the sense of a separate person there. There may be, right? So it feels like there's everything that's arising, there's all the phenomena, there's the feelings, there's the thoughts, there's the perceptions, and there's a person for whom those are all happening. There's something solid called a person for whom all of that is happening. The stuff that's arising, the perceptions, well, that's a process, but there seems to be an object or a thing for whom that is all arising, and that thing is the person. And all I'm here to talk about, really, for 2.5 days, or really, I mean, I don't know what we're going to, the subjects we might cover, but really, all I'm here to talk about for 2.5 days is just to try to point out that separate thing, the person for whom all of this is happening, is just an idea, it's just a thought, it's just a feeling, it's just a sensation, if you like. In other words, the sum total, you could say, the sum total of what you are is simply everything that's happening. It's not everything that's happening plus the person that it's happening to. That's it, really. I mean, if we get that, we can all go home now and watch television. It may seem like there's everything that's happening and then there's a person for whom it's happening. But that's not it. That's not right. There's simply everything that's happening. I mean, one way of putting it might be to say that a person is not an object, it's a process. It's just the process of everything that's happening. But one of the things that may be happening, and I've noticed it often does happen, is the sense that there is a person who is separate from what is happening. And so we've got, if you like, subject and object. You know, we've got a solid sense of me, a solid sense of me, and then stuff happens to me. Now that tends to bring with it a lot of other things. It tends to bring with it a very strong sense that this object, this person, lives in something called time. That it has a past and it has a future. And the sense of having a past and a future almost inevitably gives rise to some really juicy feelings like regret, guilt, despair, hope, anxiety, quite a few other feelings as well, maybe. So once we have a sense of separation, once we have a sense that this is something solid and unchanging, there's other things may be changing, maybe not changing, but other things happen to it, then we tend to acquire other things as well. We tend to acquire a past and a future and a story, the story of my life, as if there was someone here who had something called a life. And then other things tend to go with that as well. Very often, when we've acquired a life, then we give that life purpose. We give that life meaning. So it now seems that we are on a journey. So we have the past, we have the future, and we have perhaps a meaning. Perhaps we have a purpose. A purpose moving from the past to the future. So now I'm on a journey, and it might be an extremely meaningful journey. And it might have a goal at the end of it that I'm heading for, whatever that goal might be. Who knows? Spiritual enlightenment, maybe. The complete end of my psychoanalysis, who knows what it might be. Or saving the planet, it might be something, my goal might be saving the planet, who knows. But now everything's meaningful. And there's a trajectory through time. And I'm a person on that trajectory. And almost certainly, going along with all of that, will be some other very gripping feelings. Like, for example, with meaning and purpose, will go almost inevitably a sense of free will, a sense of choice, a sense of responsibility. We've got a question already.
Yes.
You've come a long way, so you can ask a question immediately. Go ahead.
When I understand it right, you said what is happening or what's going on is only a process. The process has nothing to do with time?
The problem is we have to use language to talk about that which no language can describe. As Alan Watts said, I'm trying to F the ineffable. So sometimes it's going to sound like that. The only way to avoid that is to pick our words so carefully that it becomes torture to listen to it. So we could say, if you like, I mean really, I should say apparent before every word. So there is an apparent process for an apparent person apparently unfolding in the appearance of time. You get the point. Yeah. So there's just this. There's just this. So there's no possibility of time. And yet, the character lives in time. Let me call you for a moment. Let me call you a character, let's say. Let me even call you a dreamed character. Right? Dreamed by oneness, if you like. That's a little bit romantic, but we can say that. Okay. You are, I love that phrase actually. I think I should use that as the title of my next book. You are a dreamed character, dreamed by oneness. Isn't that lovely? Beautiful. And like a fish lives in water, a dreamed character lives in dream time. You swim through this stuff called time, just like a fish swims through this stuff called water. I think this is rightly probably the most used traditional metaphor for trying to get at this, for trying to F the ineffable, right? The metaphor of a dream, and it is only a metaphor, and it can be misunderstood, because if I say that this is the waking dream, I do not in any way mean that it's not real. This is the waking dream, and it's real. It's the real waking dream. And it's also unreal. It's both of those. And if that sounds confusing, I think the reason that the metaphor of a dream is used so often is because for many people, maybe not for everybody, this metaphor can unconfuse that, because we have a common experience, the common experience of nighttime dream. Everyone has nighttime dreams, and almost everyone remembers at least a few of those. So everyone has the experience in sleep at night. Everyone has the experience of lots of stuff happening, of an appearance. Yeah? You take a typical, there's no such thing as a typical nighttime dream, but take a nighttime dream. You might get on a train in it. You might travel between two cities. You might meet friends on this train. You might talk to them. You might play a hand of poker with them. You might lose the hand of poker. You get off the train, the destination, because it's a dream, it might become a bit surreal. Perhaps you're met on the platform by a talking whale, who knows? Anything can happen in a dream. All sorts of things can happen in a dream. All sorts of phenomena can arise in a dream. The moment you wake up in the morning, you know that none of that was real. And yet it happened. So to say that none of that was real doesn't quite cover it. And to say that none of that was real implies, well, there was just a vacuum. But there wasn't a vacuum, there was a dream. So the best description is it was real and unreal. It was a real nighttime dream. And none of that happened. And that's known as soon as you awaken. So it's only a metaphor, and it's not an exact metaphor, but it's probably the best that there is. This is a real waking dream. It's real and it's not real. Is time real? No, of course time isn't real. How could time be real? There's only this. Where's the opportunity for time in this? I mean, how long is this? It's not even a microsecond. It's just this. So of course time isn't real. And yet, here are sentences being heard. Here is movement being watched. How can movement take place except in time? Movement can only take place in time. A sentence can only be heard over time. So of course time's real. And of course time isn't real. It's both. So this, the best description of this is it's both real and it's unreal. A lot of sometimes mischievous, sometimes not mischievous questions arise over a misunderstanding of this. You know, we hear, in a way we hear what we want to hear. And so many people hear this communication, not just from me, but from other people as well, as saying, oh, you know, this isn't real. This isn't real. Or people might say, it's an illusion. Well, not in the way most people mean that word. In a sense, you could say this is an illusion, because literally what an illusion is it's something that appears different. It's something that appears different. Right? So an illusion seems to be one thing, but it's another. In that sense of the word, you could say this is an illusion. That's not what most people mean. Most people mean, when they say, oh, so this is just an illusion, is it? They mean it's not real. Oh, you say this isn't real? No. I don't say this is not real. I say this is not real and real. There is a huge difference between those. For the character who lives, for the dream character who lives in dream time is real time. Yeah? Because the level of reality of the dream character and the level of reality of the dream time are the same. This is one of the problems. This is why you, and I'm not picking on you, right? This is why you and me, as well, I'll include myself in this. This is why we will never see liberation. The character that is sitting there, and the character that is sitting there, and the character that is sitting here will never see liberation. The character cannot see liberation because the character lives in the reality of, let's call it dream time. The dream character lives in the reality of dream time. What, in a way, I'm here to talk about is the possibility that that character can drop away. That character can be seen through. When that character is seen through, that's when this is seen to be unreal as well as real. And that's what's sometimes described as liberation. But it's not the character who can ever see that. You know, you, the character, can never see that. I, the character, can never see that. It is possible that the character can, if you like, dissolve or drop away. And that's when it's seen that this is not just real, it's also unreal. That's when it's seen that time is unreal. That's when it's seen that space is unreal. That's when it's seen that there is only oneness. That there is no separation, that the character can never see this. It doesn't matter what experience the character gives itself, in whatever ways. The character can never see that it's a character. So if you like, we're talking about the self dissolving, but the self can never get itself to dissolve. Actually, there are various ways to deconstruct the self. The two most obvious ways. You can deconstruct the self philosophically. I mean, philosophers have been deconstructing the self for a long time, and some of them extremely successfully. You know, so you could say, well, philosophically, the self makes no sense, and the self can be deconstructed. Another way to deconstruct the self, which is happening increasingly, there's an increasing interest in this at the moment, is through neuroscience. You know, the new neuroscience and the new psychology of mind and the new philosophy of mind and the new neuroscience are all deconstructing the self. It's probably fairly unlikely that you will find a neuroscientist these days who believes in a self, who gives any credence to the idea that there can possibly be such a thing as a self with all of the things that that is assumed to carry in our culture, like free will and responsibility, particularly free will and responsibility. And that's kind of interesting, but it's not what I'm here to talk about. It's kind of interesting that science is saying the same thing that mystics have said. Science now is saying the same thing that mystics have said for, in the story of time, who knows, thousands of years. But it's only kind of interesting. I mean, it's no more than that. Because the neuroscientist who can demonstrate that there is no possibility of there being a central self in here still feels like yourself. They still feel separate. So it's kind of interesting, it's kind of indicative of something, but it's not really what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about that possibility of direct seeing. And it makes no difference how many books on neuroscience we have or haven't read to that possibility of direct seeing. Acausally, without cause, acausally, outside time, outside all of the rules which seem to operate in this waking dream, it's possible that that sense that there is an organising self in here, a centre which experiences everything, can just fall away. And it's recognised that there is, if you like, only experience, there is no experiencer. As it's said in Buddhism, actions there are, but no doer thereof. So perhaps for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, this may have felt itself to be the doer of actions. And then even in a split second, there can be the sudden and quite shocking waking up to the recognition that there was never a doer. That sums it up beautifully, by the way. Actions there are, but no doer thereof. There's drinking, but there's no one who drinks. Cheers. I think that's long enough for an introductory talk. This is a short evening, so I'm going to stop there and let's just see what happens, whether there are questions or discussion. We shall see.
What frightens me the most in this appearing life is success and failure. And does this indicate that there the greatest chance is to wake up?
The greatest challenge, did you say?
Chance.
Chance, yeah.
Yeah, because this is intense fear. Is there nothing good in it?
Is there nothing good in waking up?
No, in this fear of failure. I mean, this is something that I experienced, so maybe I can get something good out of it.
Well, one of the gifts that being a person, feeling separate, often brings is a kind of neurotic anxiety, if you like. It's kind of natural for feelings to arise and fall away. You know, every feeling under the sun, including, of course, fear. Perfectly natural. Actually, without fear, I mean, again, pretending for a moment that there is such a thing as time, history and Darwinian evolution, you could say that without fear we wouldn't be here. The species wouldn't survive without fear. But of course what happens is, for a person, you know, the one living in separation, simple natural feelings like fear become, I'm using the word neurotic in a very, very vague way, they become sticky. You know, they sort of hang around. And I'm wondering whether behind your question, I'm not sure about this, but I'm wondering whether behind your question there's something about, you know, does seeing this, does awakening, does liberation make any difference to that? Or is it the other way round? Are you asking, you know, does the presence of fear, is that a good sign?
Yeah.
It's the second, is it? Right, okay. Well, in that case, I can answer the question really easily. There are no good signs. I'm sorry I took so long getting to that point. There are no bad signs. There are no good signs. What we tend to do, and it's entirely natural, you know, for the dream character who lives in time, which is filled with cause and effect, absolutely filled with cause and effect, it is absolutely natural about this, as about everything else, to start thinking in terms of cause and effect. Well, there must be something I can do, or maybe there's something I can do, or if I do this, perhaps that will happen, or perhaps a growing sense of fear is a sign of some kind of getting closer, or I mean, you know, we can speculate endlessly. Most of us have incredibly clever minds, and we can speculate endlessly. One of the things that confronts us about this is that we're outside causality. Where awakening and liberation is concerned, there's no causality. There's nothing we can talk about. There's nothing we can prescribe. There's nothing that we can do. Well, we may do plenty, but we could say everything else, everything that is experienced by a person, we can apply cause and effect to in some way or other. The problem with this is that this is not something that's experienced by a person. So cause and effect don't apply. This may be the single most frustrating thing about what we're talking about here for a person. Let me put it this way and see if it makes sense. Anything that a dream person does to bring about their own disappearance, anything a dream person does to bring about their own disappearance, is kind of, I'm going to use the word futile, but what I really mean is it sort of exists on a plane which isn't relevant to what we're talking about. If this is a dreamed character, the dreamed character cannot wake itself up to see that it's a dreamed character. It's when the dreamed character collapses that this is seen for what it... This is seen as empty and full. This is seen as oneness as well as separation. But the dreamed character can't bring about anything. It can't do anything to bring about its own disappearance. But the dreamed character will almost certainly never really get that, or will never really believe that, because the dream character lives in cause and effect. So it's not a good sign, but it's not a bad sign. It is what it is.
There isn't anything like a slow deterioration of a dream character.
There may well be. Yes, there can be a slow deterioration of a dream character.
Yeah, and isn't that connected with fear?
In the sense that it may, in the sense that what? That it may give rise to fear?
Yeah.
Well, it may or it may not, because there aren't any rules. That's the trouble.
Well, there are so many stories around of the Dark Knights.
Yeah.
I just watched something like Karen Richards, or
Right.
I think she went through the process like that.
Yeah. The most famous one probably is Susan Seagal,
Oh, really?
who went through tremendous fear. Yeah. And then the trouble is there are so many stories where that doesn't happen, where there's awakening with absolutely no fear whatsoever.
I prefer that too.
Oh, if only there was a choice. Yeah, I prefer that too as well. Yeah. That's the problem. We're talking about something which is acausal, which in a sense has no characteristics. In a way, we're even talking about something that isn't real, that doesn't really even happen. And we want to... It's natural for the character. Most characters have at least reasonably orderly minds. I mean, the characters who are completely chaotic aren't here because they couldn't find their way to the station to get here tonight. So most of us have reasonably orderly minds, and we want kind of guidelines and we want rules and things like that. So we come across a story, maybe if we're interested in this, we come across a story perhaps like, say like Susan Seagal's. I haven't read Karen Richards, and we think, oh well, maybe that's a clue. Well, it was in her case, but then not in a different case. That's the problem. There are no rules in what we're talking about. One of the things that's sometimes said about this is the ultimate anarchy. You know, it's absolute and complete anarchy. Every spiritual path, every religion, every psychological path, every psychotherapeutic path has some kind of rules, often very strict ones. We expect that. If we're going to get somewhere, then we expect maybe a little bit of discipline and a few rules might help. But the trouble is we're not going to get anywhere with this. We can't help thinking in terms of me getting somewhere with this. It's impossible not to think in those terms for most of us. You know, there's me and there's a goal. And let's call that goal liberation or awakening or whatever we want, just for the sake of it. It's kind of virtually impossible for the person, the one who feels separate, not to think in these terms. There's me, there's a goal, there must be a way to that goal, there must be cause and effect, there must be a process that can take me to that goal, whether it's clearing my chakras or chanting an ashram or whatever it may be. It's virtually impossible for the one who feels separate not to think in that way. It is highly confrontative to be faced with the reality that there are no rules here. We're talking about complete anarchy. It's not just throwing the rule book out of the window, it's throwing the whole library of rule books out of the window. There are a library of rule books. I mean, in Buddhism alone, there's probably 1,000 different forms of Buddhism with their own rule books now. And that's just one spiritual philosophy. There's probably tens of thousands of rule books. And none of them have any bearing. It's so frustrating for the one who feels themselves separate.
These rules, are they not nurturing hope?
They're all doing one of two things, and many of them are doing both of them. They're either nurturing hope or they're nurturing fear, one or the other. I mean, they tend to go together.
Yeah.
You know, if you're talking about spiritual paths, religions, things like that, they tend to walk on two legs: the leg of promising hope and intimidating us with fear. Even the best of them does. I mean, I'm quite fond of Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist, but I'm quite fond of Buddhism. But my God, you start reading about the Buddhist hells. Oh. So yeah. Anything which appears to be a path with a goal at the end of it is nurturing hope. And most of those paths will also try to whip us along and keep us in order with a nice healthy bit of fear as well, like the threat of the 8th crushing rope hell or whatever it might be.
So your words make hopeless.
I hope my words make hopeless. There's a lovely paradox,
Yeah.
isn't it? Really, yeah. I claim the great mantra, which is in a very good book, which if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, and there just happens to be some copies of it out there. But I claim, there's a chapter in that book, in one of those books, on the great mantra. I do claim it as my own, and the great mantra is helpless, hopeless, meaningless. That is often what strikes. There are no, going back to what you were saying, there are no good signs, there are no bad signs. It's not a bad sign that fear is coming up. You know, it's just what's happening. There are no good signs, there are no bad signs. And yet, and I hope this doesn't sound contradictory, I have noticed that often where there's awakening, there has been hopelessness and helplessness, a little bit of despair, and a sense of the meaninglessness of everything. I mean, again, as separate people living a life which seems to have a beginning and an end and a goal and free will and responsibility and so forth, we tend to regard despair as rather a bad thing. I would like to reframe that. I would like to consider that despair may be a wonderful thing. Despair is kind of quite close to this. I get emails from people and phone calls from people about being in despair, and this is absolutely not a joke. More than one individual has contacted me and said, I'm in despair and it's great. Or I'm in despair and it's wonderful. Or I'm in despair and it's such a relief. Because despair is a kind of giving up of all that effort and effort and effort to get somewhere. Hope is so tiring. As long as there's hope, there is always something that you should be, not just could be, but should be doing Surely you could just spend another half hour meditating and make it 10 hours a day instead of 9.5 hours a day. Shouldn't you be chanting more? Couldn't you be getting up, 4:30 in the morning? Couldn't you be getting up at 3:30 in the morning and chanting more? Yeah, okay, you're spending £200, €200 a week on chakra clearing. What do you think might happen if you spent €400 a week on chakra clearing? You see, that's how hope works. Drives you on. Hope is a really hard taskmaster. It's also, hope is extremely good business, which is perhaps also why we notice there is all, what are religions, what are spiritual paths selling? Hope. Absolutely, yeah. It's very tiring. This is genuine. I'm neither making this up or just saying it to be funny or anything like that. This is absolutely genuine. I totally relate to it. I have more than one person, far more than one person, has talked to me about going into despair and finding that a relief. Because at least in despair, it's possible to relax. You can't relax with hope because there's always something you should be doing. Even if you're sitting doing nothing in a chair, there's something you should be doing. In despair, there is nothing you can do. So you might as well relax. And there is absolutely no secret on sale here, but if there was a secret, it would be to relax. That would be the secret. And I'm not the only one to say that. If I could sell anything other than these very, very good books that are out there, if I could sell anything, it would be, if I could somehow bring it about, it would be to relax. I've been reading a book recently by, I think he's a 13th century Tibetan Lama, so he must be very wise because he's very old, about Dzogchen, which is kind of the Tibetan Buddhist equivalent of this. And the translator is an English Buddhist, the translator. And he's written a very, very good introduction to this book. And at the end of it, at the end of this introduction, he says, this isn't exactly right, but it's a paraphrase. He says, relaxation is the key to Buddhahood here and now. And that's it. There is no technique, there is no path, there is nothing to be done. But if there were, it would be relaxation. Relaxation is the closest to this. When I say this, that which we're here to talk about, non-duality, seeing non-duality, relaxation is the closest to seeing non-duality that the one who still feels himself to be a person can get to.
Like giving up.
Yes, it's a giving up, it's a hopelessness. Hopeless, helpless, meaningless. Hopeless, helpless, meaningless. If that, we can't create that, but if that happens, it's amazing how relaxing it can be. Can I just tell you a little anecdote? Because that is my mantra. I do claim it, and it is copyright. So if you sell it to anybody else, I will expect a 10% of the fee. But it came to me. I was in the audience many years ago, watching somebody else give a talk on non-duality, and it popped into my head, and I just blurted it out. I said, "So what you're saying is that everything is helpless, hopeless and meaningless. We're helpless, it's hopeless, and it's meaningless." And in the tea break, somebody who I knew, who was also in the audience, came up to me and he said, "Richard," he said, "that was the most depressing thing I've ever heard anybody say." And I started to apologise to him, and he said, "No," he said, "it was wonderful." So, maybe we can get some of that sense. The dark night of the soul, maybe it's the same thing. There's nothing we can do except just flop down and relax in the dark night of the soul.
Maybe what you're saying is expressed in that Buddhist story where the guy is hanging to a cliff and below is the tiger and the wood is cracking, but he sees a strawberry and picks it up and enjoys it thoroughly. Is that in a sort of image what
Yes.
you're referring to?
Well, it is. No, I think that is getting at the same thing. I have to say I have a bit of resistance to stories like that because they're so incredibly noble.
Well, there are stories.
They're stories, yeah. It's a kind of nice story. There is an implication in it that somehow that what we're talking about is a state somehow, and in that state there will be this magnificent separation from. No, not necessarily. No, not necessarily. I mean, it's just as likely that a terror at being eaten by a tiger might arise. This isn't about any particular state. It's not about, being in a state of Zen calmness when threatened by a tiger. But it's a nice story. But let me add to it another one of my favourite Zen anecdotes, which is of the Zen monk who said, "Now I'm enlightened, I'm just as miserable as ever." This isn't about anything that the character thinks it can be about. It's not about peace or serenity. Somebody was interviewing me yesterday and they were talking about, an end to suffering. The Buddha taught an end to suffering. Is this an end to suffering? What we're talking about here? Well, only if you define suffering in a very, very, very special way. In which case, it's an end to personal suffering, because it's the end of the person. But can suffering still arise? Of course it can still arise. Anything can happen. There are no rules about this, and also there's no reward for this. There's no reward for seeing oneness. Oneness is seen, and then unless that coincides with physical death, life goes on. Maybe better, maybe worse, maybe the same. There are some tendencies, but there are no rules. And I do like that story, and there are other stories as well, but one of the problems is that the idea that there is some kind of state, even if it's a state of just a rising above all possible negative feelings. So in this situation of the tigers, no fear arises, and so there is just the perfect tasting of the strawberry. The problem with these stories that revolve around the idea that this has got to do with some kind of state or some kind of special experience, it keeps us on the hamster wheel. It keeps us on what the Buddhists call the wheel of becoming. Because as long as I've got that kind of story running, then there isn't that kind of seeing, well, this is it, whatever's going on, this is it. There's peace and serenity here, well, that's it. There's anger here, well, that's it. There's fear here, particularly of a tiger, well, that's it.
And despair, because he has no choice.
There's despair here, that's it. There's excitement here, that's it. Now there are definitely tendencies for certain common feelings or experiences to decrease or to no longer arise. But they're only tendencies. They're just tendencies. Can despair still arise? Why not? But not for someone. Can anger still arise? Why not? But it's not anger for someone. Can happen, same for happiness. Can happiness still arise? Of course it can. But not for anyone. Does that make any difference? Well, in a sense, no. And in another sense, it's the only difference that deserves to be called a difference. I was very tempted to say there, it's the only difference that matters, but of course it doesn't matter. But there is kind of quite a gulf between anger arising and anger arising for a person. But if we think there's some special state or some special experience that this is about, then that tends to keep us on what the Buddhists call the wheel of becoming, and what I call more prosaically the hamster wheel. You know hamster wheel? You know, yeah? Just suddenly wondering whether there's a translation problem there, possibly. So we think we're on a path, but we're actually on a wheel. We think we're going forward, but we're actually going round and round. You know those Max Escher drawings of impossible staircases? Yeah? I mean, that's what it's like. Being a person living in separation is like being on a Max Escher staircase.
What was it? Hopeless?
Hopeless, helpless, meaningless. I should, of course, say, if you want to know it, you should buy the book.
Yeah.
No, it's hopeless, helpless, meaningless.
It's getting bigger.
It's all hopeless. I am helpless. It's all meaningless. It's wonderfully, gloriously meaningless. Everything's so much more glorious when it's seen to be without meaning, because meanings inevitably make everything puny and pygmy. These flowers here are here, for the glorification of God. Well, how puny is that? Oh, no, these flowers aren't here for the glory of God. They're here. There's an old soldier's song in England. Maybe you have a German equivalent. Soldiers singing about the plight they're in. It just goes, we're here because we're here, because we're here, because we're here. Flower is here because it's here. It doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't need any meaning. It's glorious. I mean, look at it. Look at them. They're glorious. And you could say the same about us. I mean, we find it easy. Probably most of us find it easy to accept that the flowers don't have a meaning. We find it more difficult to accept that we don't have a meaning. Because we associate meaning with meaninglessness with despair. Existential despair. Where does existential despair come from? Oh, it comes from my feeling my life has no meaning. Well, listen carefully to that sentence. Existential despair comes from the feeling that my life has no meaning. Well, guess what? I don't have a life. You don't have a life. You don't have a life that is meaningless, and therefore you should be in despair, according to the existentialists. There is just life, and it's meaningless. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? It means there is nothing left to do but relax and enjoy it. No need to please the Guru. No need to please God. No need even to forgive our mothers. I mean, we can forgive our mothers if we want to, but no need to. Everything is simply what it is. It doesn't need any added meaning. Everything's so full anyway that there's no space for added meaning.
The interesting story is, I think, that most of the people who sit on this chair, in their story, they had, before most of them that I know, somehow contacts in all this kind of spiritual seeking.
You think that looks suspicious, do you?
No. So again, then I have a question, maybe it has an influence.
Yeah, well, it may. The thing is, one of the things I haven't said yet. Maybe I'll talk about this more tomorrow. Is how much is unknowable. You know, when this is seen for what it is, it's realised that almost everything is unknowable, and so the mind tends to stop speculating because it sees that there is no end to that speculation. But nevertheless, as a description, what you just said is certainly partially right. There are also many, many, many spontaneous awakenings where that isn't the case, where there's been no history of interest, if you like, in these sorts of matters. There's been a completely spontaneous awakening. There are many, many cases of that. I have a suspicion, and I don't know if this is true, that if there's been a history of interest and maybe spending some time on paths and things like that, it might be more likely that the one for whom there's been an awakening ends up sitting in a chair like this talking about it. I don't know, but I just have that suspicion. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, you see, because we as, you know, the person, the self, the one who feels separated, lives in a world of cause and effect. It's not just difficult for us, you know, to step out of that paradigm. It's impossible. It's impossible, and so we're bound to look for cause and effect, and we're bound to be, well, not suspicious, but it's quite likely we'll have some kind of reaction to the one who says this is acausal. This is acausal. I'm quoting the great U.G. Krishnamurti there, by the way. U.G. Krishnamurti said that as well. This is acausal. It has no cause.
In the moment when I said it to you, I asked myself, why did I say it? And I think it's, again, an impulse to avoid despair.
Yeah.
To find a little...
Find a chink.
Yeah.
Yes. And yet...
Maybe there is a way. That maybe there is a way.
It's absolute. This is for many individuals. I'm not saying for you. I've no idea, but for many individuals, that is absolutely addictive. Absolutely addictive. Yeah. And I know people who go to talks like this, you know, regularly, over and over again. Have been going for years and years, you know, and are still, you know, still hanging on to what you're talking about, that hope that actually maybe there is a way. Maybe there is. If I just have one more ayahuasca trip, or if I just go and see my...
Luckily, my addiction is now very small.
Good. Well, yeah, if I just go and see my guru in the Himalayas just once more. I mean, there's one very, very good reason for going to see your guru in the Himalayas, and that's that you enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. Great. But it's more than an addiction. It's such an ingrained part of our thinking. You know, because that's how in the dream reality, for the dream character, that's how stuff works. There is cause and effect. So how can there not be cause and effect here? Well, I'll tell you how there can not be cause and effect here, because this isn't about something that happens to the dream character. It's about something that happens in spite of the dream character, not to them.
So even the concept of surrender and letting go, total acceptance, is just an attempt of the mind to avoid what is.
Yes, in a way. Yeah, you could say that it's an attempt of the mind to understand the ineffable, understand what can't be understood. And if you like, by doing that, avoiding what is. Yeah. Yeah. And these are wonderful injunctions, aren't they? Totally surrender. It sounds so beautiful. I had somebody in one of my talks in London almost in tears because she'd been told by, I can't remember who it was, that she had to totally surrender. How beautiful. How impossible. What does it even mean? To totally surrender? How would you even know that you've totally surrendered? How do you do it? What's the intelligent thing to do with that injunction? Well, the intelligent thing to do with that injunction is ask the one in the chair whether they did that. And if they did, how they did it. But it's beautiful. And it feeds a certain kind of ego structure. Particularly maybe a little bit of a masochistic ego. So, we all have our different characters. And maybe if I'm a bit masochistic and I'm looking to be beaten up, then I'll go to a guru who'll sit in a chair and tell me, the reason that you don't get this is because you haven't totally surrendered. Now go away and totally surrender. It's not possible to totally surrender. I mean, that phrase doesn't even really mean anything. So if I do have this masochistic character, I've now got a reason to beat myself up for the next 2 years. Because I'm not managing to totally surrender. What's the proof of that? The proof of that is that I'm not seeing liberation. So I'm on this hamster wheel. I think telling people to totally surrender is quite a cruel thing to do, actually. I've told this anecdote before, but I'm sure there are one or two people here that haven't heard it. This is a teaching story from the Guru tradition. Okay, so this young man arrives at this Guru encampment on top of a cliff, and he begs the Guru to take him as his devotee. And the Guru says, "No, I don't want you as my devotee, absolutely not." And the young man begs and weeps and cries. And the Guru still says, "No, bugger off." And the young man says, "If you don't, I'm so desperate to be your devotee, but if you don't take me as your devotee, I'm going to throw myself off the cliff and kill myself, because life is not worth living without you." And the Guru said, "I don't care what you do, kill yourself if you want." So the young man runs to the edge of the cliff, jumps off, and is smashed on the rocks below. At which point the Guru says to his followers, "Go down to the bottom of the cliff and bring me back the body of that young man." So they do that, and the broken, bloodied body is laid out at the Guru's feet. And the Guru does his incantations and his chants and his mudras. If he's a Buddhist Guru, I don't know, whatever. And the young man is miraculously healed and comes back to life. And the Guru says to him, "Now I will take you as my disciple, as my devotee, because you have proved that you want enlightenment more than life itself." Isn't that beautiful? What a story! How romantic, how wonderful, how beautiful, and what utter crap it is. What complete and total crap. Talk about feeding the spiritual ego. So that's what you have to do, you see. You have to want liberation more than life itself. But excuse me, how are you going to do that? Are you going to hold your breath under the bath water? And, I mean, it's just crazy. And notice that for all of these wonderful, they're so noble, aren't they? I mean, they really are romantic and noble. But notice that for every injunction, such as you have to want liberation more than life itself, there'll be another teacher who'll say you have to give up wanting liberation entirely. The reason you don't have liberation is because you want it. Now go away and give it up entirely.
Which a person never be able to do.
Of course, again, how are you going to do that? What happens is what happens.
Richard, you started off with this, and in this, am I correct in assuming that you refer to the same thing as other people who refer to the same as now? Talking about
Yeah,
the
probably.
now, live in the now, or the power of now.
Well, let's not get into the power of now.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
we can
forget
later
about
if
it.
you want, but yeah, I mean, language is very tricky, and I don't want to get too pedantic. I tend to avoid the word now just because it's a time-bound word, and it kind of it implies duration. How long is now, or how long is the now? And it also, because of the association with the power of now, it's also very, very much bound up. It's difficult to hear anyone talk about the now without the now, without
here
this kind
and
of
now.
automatic thing of it becoming a technique, like, well, you know, it's good to be in the here and now.
Exactly.
Well, I'm not quite sure how it would be possible not to be in the here and now, frankly, but we know what that means. It's a kind of poor man's Buddhist mindfulness, isn't it? Being in the now. You know, being in the now basically means don't think about the past or future. When you taste the water, taste the water. Don't taste the water and the memory of what your ex-wife 3 wives ago said to you as she finally slammed out of the door. That's what being in the now means. As I say, it's a kind of poor man's Buddhist mindfulness. I mean, mindfulness is a useful technique. It's just not useful for this. When I say it's useful, I mean many people derive a lot of benefit from mindfulness. I'm not knocking mindfulness at all. Many people derive psychological and emotional benefit from mindfulness. It is a good therapeutic technique. The problem is that what we're talking about here isn't therapy. So for me, that word now, I mean, it's kind of obviously a time word, isn't it? You know, if there's a now, there's a then. If there's a present, there's a past and a future. And how long is that duration? This has no duration. It has no duration. But there's a dream of duration arising in this. There's this, and this contains a dream of duration.
it's an absurd situation.
Oh, yes.
This character with this mind sits here and tries to understand what he can't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of inescapable. We could call it an inescapable trap, except it's not really a trap. It's just how things are. Yeah. In the same way that the character can't see outside cause and effect. It's inescapable, yeah.
It's an hopeless effort,
Yeah,
without any meaning.
yeah. Until it,
And
well,
there's no help
yeah,
for him
yeah, and it may stop. It's a hopeless effort until it stops.
until it stops.
Yeah,
But he can't make it stop.
no, but it can stop. Yeah.
And when it stops, the whole story continues anyway.
Well, hang on. What's the it? We said when it
That's
stops.
the whole thing difficult to say.
When it stops.
When, say, kind of...
when the self stops. When the self drops. Do you mean?
I don't know how to say. Yeah, maybe. So maybe awakening happens to someone?
Well,
Or happens?
maybe awakening happens in spite of someone.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then I still like to go to a football
Oh
match,
yeah.
and I still dislike Bayern München, and I still dislike
You still dislike what?
Bayern Munich.
Right. Okay. I presume this is some kind of sporting reference, is
football.
it?
Soccer team.
Okay, that's lost on me, but never mind. Go on.
Yeah, and maybe jealousy pops up.
Yeah.
And
maybe.
I like to eat chocolate in spite.
Yeah.
So all these things just keep going on.
They may.
Maybe.
Or they may not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
But if there's physical death, they won't.
yeah.
But what I really mean is, yeah, everything may go on like that unchanged, or there may be changes. Who knows? Anything's possible. But yeah, I mean, the character has preferences, and there's no particular reason why the preferences should change. So if you like football, there's no particular reason why, if this is seen suddenly, it should become cricket.
Right. And when I'm standing this character might stand in a traffic jam, he still might get upset.
Absolutely, he might. He might.
He might.
Now, what's the time? Have we got time to go into this? Yeah, we have. There are absolutely no necessary rules about this. There are no rules, but there are tendencies, and one of the tendencies is for feelings or emotions which are neurotically driven to decrease or perhaps to disappear. So if the character gets angry in traffic jams because of some kind of neurotic energy, it is quite possible, but by no means certain, that that may decrease or disappear. But apart from that, yeah, of course, anything that arose could still arise, and there's no reason why preferences should necessarily change. However, amongst the tendencies, if I pursue this a little bit longer, amongst the tendencies I've communicated with a lot of people about this because I kind of, I've put myself out there. I've got a website, people can phone me, they email me, and so forth. One tendency I've noticed is that there tends to be a quietening down in terms of, there tends to be a desire for a quieter life, let's say. There's a tendency for individuals to become lazy. Personally, I entirely approve of that. I see laziness as a great virtue and a very underrated virtue indeed. And we could talk about that more if you like. But there's definitely a tendency. I get contacted by so many people. Even there's just been an awakening, a kind of partial seeing of this, and I get so many people contacting me saying, I just don't want to do anything much anymore. Just sort of sit around, watch telly, read books, maybe. That is a tendency, yeah. And I'm not saying in any way this is a a rule or an absolute in any way whatsoever. I would just sort of say as a comment, you know, that as a matter of fact, here in this experience, there hasn't been boredom or depression. And I've talked to a few others about that, and they've said the same. And I have kind of theories about why that is, but they're probably not very interesting. But I just give that as a description of what arises. You know, everything arises, all sorts of things arises, but as a matter of fact, boredom and depression don't arise. Now, I've no doubt they could, because anything's possible, but they don't.
As far as I understand you, there is just being out of the dream or being part of the dream. Was there kind of something like a dawn or like a glimpses coming up and then finally the Big Bang, yeah, thanks. Or is this either on or off?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as the phrase that you use. I can't quite remember it. I would describe it more as, you know, there's either there's the not seeing that it's a dream, or there's a seeing that it's a dream. Let's say, well, again, there's no rules. As a matter of fact, what can happen, what happened here, and what can happen, has happened in many cases, is that there can be a kind of an initial sudden seeing. That can often be momentary. It could be a split second even.
So the veil of forgetfulness or dream?
There's just a complete disappearance of any sense that this is real, and yet everything just goes on.
But then falling asleep can happen again.
Excuse me?
And then falling asleep can happen again after.
Well, if it's a momentary awakening, that's what happens. It tends to only last a little while, obviously. And then the person comes back, but the person who comes back is often very, very different because of that, and often extremely confused. It's like, what the hell happened? Because, again, everything that's been experienced by the person has been experienced by the person. In other words, everything that's been experienced has been experienced up to then from this centre. Right? So that must be how reality is organised, mustn't it? And then suddenly there's a bang, maybe just a split second, and that's all blown apart. And there's this sudden realisation that this centre here is, if you like, completely false. I mean, when I say it's false, I don't mean it can do anything to see that, but that it's... that's been the experience for maybe 45 or 50 years, and then suddenly, bang, and it's gone, and it's seen that it actually isn't how things have to be. And then what can happen is that sense of there being a centre here can come back, but it will probably have a radical effect then on the one who's come back. And one of those effects we've already talked about. It's quite possible, although by no means inevitable, they may experience despair. It's like everything they believed in has suddenly been blown apart. Everything they thought they knew about reality has suddenly been blown apart. And they've had a glimpse of something, but they have no idea how to get back to it. And so that's what tends to bring about a certain amount of despair. Later on, there can be, it doesn't have to be like this in any way at all, but later on, it's common enough for it to be commented on. Later on, there can be, if you like, a further falling away, where everything then just drops into place. And the difference between these two fallings away, and this might be something it would be better to talk about tomorrow, because it's quite a big thing, the difference between these two fallings away, if they happen like this, is that in the first falling away, everything is seen to be empty, completely empty, including this, totally empty, nothing here, a vacuum in which ghosts appear, a vacuum, if you like, producing a hologram. In that second seeing, this is seen again to be empty, but it's also seen to be full. And what it's seen to be full of is love. Now, both these seeings can occur spontaneously together. Another possibility is that there's simply a gradual gliding into seeing this with no noticeable event whatsoever. It's probably perfectly possible for an event, as it were, to happen in deep sleep, so there's no conscious knowledge of it, and yet everything's different on waking up in the morning. I'm sure that's possible. Well, anything's possible. But the difference between the first seeing, which can lead to despair, it doesn't have to by any means, but it can lead to despair, and the second seeing, which does not lead to despair, the reason the second seeing doesn't lead to despair is because in the second seeing it's seen that everything's full of love. Or everything, I mean, there's no satisfactory way of putting this. We could say everything's full of love, or everything is love, or there's only love, or this whole manifestation is an outpouring of love. Doesn't matter. However we put it, it's not adequate. And that's what seems to bring this kind of end, this full stop, to the one who thought they were a person. After that, I'm not going to say it's no longer possible, because anything's possible, but after that it is unlikely that the one who thought that they were a person will go back to thinking that they're a person again.
But when this first seeing, where everything is just empty, lasts for a long time, it doesn't seem to stop.
Well, anything can happen, but it can be a split second. I mean, you hear reports of this in the Zen tradition. You know, it's just a kind of, well, as I said, literally a split second it might be. It's like a thunderclap. Can I give you one? I know very little of the Upanishads, but I do have a favourite quote from the Upanishad, which again is in that exceptionally good book out there. And it's, am I plugging this a bit too much? I'm being a bit too obvious about this, aren't I? I'll try and be a bit subtler tomorrow. So this is from the Upanishads. It goes, the lightning strikes, the eye blinks. Now I've forgotten it. I'll have to go and buy a copy of the book myself.
This was more subtle now.
The lightning strikes, the eye blinks. Then you have either seen or you have not seen. If you have not seen, too bad. I mean, that's great, that is. That really sums it up. You know, it's just a split second, and in that split second, it's like there's the possibility of seeing this as it really is. And then that seeing, well, it happens or it doesn't. So what? It's very, very good. I've no idea what the rest of the Upanishads are like, but that bit's very good. And I'm being given the sign. Love, yeah, thank you, Georgia. Okay, so it's 9:30. So thank you for being here, and we finished for this evening, and we'll go on tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.